Appropriations Committee. Chair calls Senate Bill 92, Representative Abrams, the minority leader.
Let's try that. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the Lazarus bill. This is a bill that would allow DeKalb County and DeKalb County alone to ask the citizens of that county to impose on themselves, if they choose, a SPLOST that would be limited to very specific purposes of transportation and related transportation projects. It would have to be agreed to by every city or municipality in the county. It is not a tax increase. It is an exemption from the existing ceiling, which is only imposed on the county of DeKalb, because DeKalb is the only county that has both a MARTA tax and a host tax. This body has been kind enough to pass this bill out before. Unfortunately, due to some confusion on the floor, it lost by a very small number of votes, and Senator Ford has been kind enough to allow us to use SB 92 as a vehicle. I would ask this committee's consideration that we move this bill again to rules.
Any questions of any member of the committee?
Yes, sir. Representative Martin.
Representative Martin.
I'm sorry, Pro Tem Jones.
I'm sorry, Pro Tem Jones.
I wanted to ask the lady, what is the rationale in allowing one state to go, or not one state, one county to go up to 8%?
The issue is that DeKalb County is the only county that has no vehicle, and no pun, well, pun barely intended, has no taxing capacity to pay for transportation. Because of our host tax, which would normally be the tax that other counties would use to meet that obligation, we are not allowed to spend those dollars on transportation. They have to go back to reducing property tax. Because of the MARTA tax, it can only be used to pay for our participation in MARTA. There is no other mechanism within state law that allows us to impose a tax for the purpose of transportation except the SPLOST. And right now, because of the state cap on the amount that you can charge, because we've made these earlier decisions regarding host and MARTA, there is no other mechanism. So we're simply asking that if the members of the county, if the citizens of the county choose to request this, that they be allowed to do so. We have $1 billion. I think it's a little over $1 billion in backlog transportation projects that are very, very rapidly inching towards being dangerous. And this would give us an opportunity to spend 10 years to clean this up, and we would have to come back before this body before we were allowed to ask for any more money. And so it really is for a very narrow and limited purpose. But to the core of your question, we would not be the only entity that has a larger than 8%. The city of Atlanta, because of the extraordinary circumstance of the water sewer system. In fact, I was here as deputy city attorney almost a decade ago to ask about that. This is an extraordinary circumstance. It is an exceptional request, and I do not foresee it being necessary again after the 10-year expiration.
Further question. How is it distinct from Fulton?
Fulton County does not have a host, and so it's allowed.
We have a lost.
You have a lost, but you don't have a host, and the host is what has precluded us from being able to allocate funds for the purpose of transportation.
I guess I'm not clear, and I have a feeling you are, because in our county I am not, and I'm probably just not aware of it, that we utilize host for anything other than operations.
I believe you all. I believe Fulton County, and I'm getting to dangerous territory. And if I may ask the gentle lady, I'm happy to get a more specific answer. But my understanding is that because of the structure of our funding mechanisms in DeKalb County, we have not been able to allocate our funds for transportation appropriately. But I will find out the precise answer to your question.
Further question, maybe the former mayor here might know the answer, but I did have a further question. The he not me him. And that is, do you think that this would impede a regional T-SPLOST of some other form in the future, which was already a bit of an issue in the Atlanta region or in the city of Atlanta, if we start having a checkerboard of different tax rates?
I do not, because I think that the challenge for DeKalb County specifically during the SPLOST, the T-SPLOST conversation, and I, although being an initial opponent of the T-SPLOST, became a very strong advocate for it throughout the county. The issue was the mix of projects did not reflect the needs of the local county because of exactly this reason. It is difficult to get DeKalb County to agree to regional change when they believe that their local needs have yet to be met when it comes to transportation. I actually think the passage of this will encourage their participation in a regional SPLOST because they will understand that their local needs will be met as well as expanding regional opportunity.
If you will indulge me one final question, and I would have to defer on but I don't believe in Fulton County we use LOST. I guess of any significance transportation, I've always felt that some counties get SPLOST to use for libraries and roads, and like it or not, in Fulton and DeKalb we get MARTA. But I have seen that at least some of my cities, and actually our county, have done bond referendums. What would preclude DeKalb from using that avenue for transportation as opposed to increasing the sales tax?
I think our current situation, and I'm not sure if Mr. May is here, I think our current situation is such that a bond referendum would, I will say this, having worked for the city of Atlanta and watched our transportation projects and thus being able to view also what's happened in Fulton County, over the last 20 years, Fulton County and the municipalities in Fulton have been consistent in issuing bond referenda and being able to maintain their transportation issues, and they've been able to do so in, I think, a fairly reasonable and an appropriate managerial process. DeKalb County has not done so, and so we find ourselves in an extraordinary circumstance equivalent, I think, to what Atlanta faced with its water sewer system, which is that after decades of not doing what we should do, we now face an extraordinary circumstance that if left untouched, we cannot do. I would assume that the challenge with doing a bond referendum to meet the extraordinary needs of the city of DeKalb County related to transportation project would be the moral equivalent of when Atlanta tried to do the bond. We did a bond referendum for water sewer. It wasn't sufficient. We also needed an additional source of revenue because you still have to sell those bonds. You have to get people. You have to get placement of those bonds. This is I think an extraordinarily large sum that the citizens can decide they either want to pay for it or they don't. But a bond referendum, I don't think, would be an adequate remedy for the long-term needs, because I think what is happening now is that the county commission, as it's currently comprised, is trying to make up for the mistakes that it preceded it.
Representative Knight has a question.
To my friend, and it was sort of along the same lines, going back to T-Splash. Again, I know that when we're looking at things from a regional point of view, and that was a very important part of why we did the T-Splash. So one of my fears is, and this is an honest policy issue, is that we start only looking at us narrowly from a local perspective within a local jurisdiction, that planning and issues like that we're going to end up complicating more traffic instead of looking at it from a 3,000 foot level and jumping up to a 15,000 foot level. That is one question. Second question is has DeKalb County used all other means available to them? In other words, property taxes, things of that sort. In other words, have we exhausted every other option available?
I will respond in this way, and I think, and I do not intend to be glib, but I think it's important to understand the situation in DeKalb County. Unlike, I think, the other comparable counties, which would be Cobb, Gwinnett, and Fulton, DeKalb County is really developed as a residential county. There have been a lot of decisions made about industrialization, which tends to drive transportation decisions. You usually build additional roadways or improve roadways because you've got commerce. DeKalb hasn't made those choices. So unlike a county like Gwinnett, which really built itself out based on industrialization as well as residential,
case, and there is no way that any of these funds would be used for any other purpose than transportation projects.
So what I would point to is the language, and just by way of reference, if you look to the top of that, starting lines 100 through 114, all of this entire section refers to capital projects. So this is a capital project the capital projects are embedded in this, but in fact, because that question was raised, I think, by Chairman Powell, this additional language was added to further refine and constrain it. Anything else would be inappropriate, but more importantly, as Chairman Harbin pointed out, there would have to be, the municipalities would have to agree before the county had to agree before it even got to the citizens. And so if anyone decided to deviate from what I believe is a fairly uniform and standard requirement that this only be for capital projects, I assure you that there will be some citizen in DeKalb County who raises a red flag. But I do not believe that flag should be or will need to be raised, because given the nature of this referendum, it would have to be limited to capital projects. Within the capital projects opportunity, it has to be limited to transportation, and within that, any infrastructure that is done has to be transportation related.
Just sees no more questions. What is the pleasure of the committee? Motion made and seconded. All those in favor of passing the measure, please raise your right hand for purposes of a hand count. Opposed, like sign. The bill passes. Thank you very much. Senate Resolution 415, President Pro Tem Schaefer.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, it's my privilege to present Senate Resolution 415, which is a constitutional amendment that prevents the Georgia General Assembly from raising the income tax. Georgia actually has the highest income tax of any state in the southeast United States. Tennessee and Florida have a 0% tax on earned income. Alabama's at 3%, and North Carolina just lowered its income tax from 6% to 5.75%, so it'll be a quarter of a point lower than ours, and I believe that puts us at a competitive disadvantage. What this constitutional amendment will do is allow the people who sell this state to show businesses that are considering coming here that even though North Carolina's rate may be a quarter of a point lower than ours, it could go up 1 point, 2 points, 3 points tomorrow. Georgia will be the only state where you have a guarantee that it won't go above the current rate. So I believe it will help us attract new businesses, create jobs, and stimulate revenue for our state. It passed the state Senate by an overwhelming bipartisan majority. Democrats and Republicans recognize that will increase the culture of prosperity in this state, and your subcommittee chaired by Chairman Powell, I think, has improved the resolution dramatically, and I would urge your support of the substitute and be happy to answer any questions.
Chair sees no questions. What's the pleasure of the committee? Do pass. And second, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Measure passes. Measure passes. Senate Resolution 875. Senator Hill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for taking up 875 today. As I spoke to you recently about it, it involves a resolution that will form a study committee to look at tax digest formation as it pertains to education and as it pertains particularly to payments in lieu of taxes and how they're handled and how this process moves through the certification process. And the thing that we have discovered, and there's an audit that was done just this past year that pointed out some of the policy issues having to do with the fact that there's no state repository of all the payment in lieu of taxes agreements around the state. Some of them, in the most likely way, is that school boards are not involved in payment in lieu of taxes agreements. On the other hand, there are some, and there appears to be a possibility that a school system could have a piece of property not listed on the tax digest and gain equalization and local fair share funds and at the same time be receiving a payment in lieu of taxes. We don't know that. We don't think that's true, but I will tell you this, when we consider requests from representatives and senators for funding every year, and we just did 3 in the amended budget to correct mistakes, I can just tell you the information that we need to make an informed decision is not out there, and this process will hopefully make us understand the process better, and also make us develop a repository of all these agreements so that everybody will be able to check and see who has what agreement and where are we in that agreement. The Department of Education apparently does not check anybody's figures in dividing up equalization funds. They accept whatever the tax digest as it is presented. And the more questions that we ask in the past couple of years, the more queasy we became about this whole process. So this joint resolution will attempt to set some policy so we'll know how to react when we have those requests.
Chair sees no questions of the author. Mr. Chairman, who will be handling the legislation in the House?
I had talked to Representative Knight about it, sir.
Representative Knight will be good. What is the pleasure of the committee? Do pass and second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Heath, right? Yes, sir. Senate Resolution 783, Senator Heath.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, present to you Senate Resolution 783, another constitutional amendment. Maybe a little bit bad timing, but seems like you're on a roll. What this resolution would do is propose to the voters a question of, do you want to eliminate the state's ad valorem tax? Most of you all will remember that we are in the process of phasing out the state's collection of ad valorem tax. I believe it's calendar year 2015 will be the last year, if we don't change something, be the last year to collect that. This would pose the question, once that rate goes to 0, would you like to amend the Constitution so as to require the two-thirds vote of the General Assembly and more than 50% of the voters to re-implement that tax. Now, I know that you all understand tax policy very well and know what the ad valorem tax is. Many have said that that's the most egregious tax that there is, a tax on one's home. It's applied without regard to one's ability to pay. And I think this is a good measure. I'd be glad to answer any question. I know it's been through the subcommittee process and a lot of questions there, but I'll be glad to try to answer any questions if there are any.
Yes, sir.
Representative Flood has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Heath, just a point of clarification. You mentioned that the resolution or the ballot measure would read when the tax goes to 0. There's no reference to the tax going to 0, and I think, as we talked about in subcommittee, the concern, one of the concerns that I have is the inability for many of our constituents to distinguish between the variety of different taxes that they might incur, and the question of whether or not taxes are going to be prohibited could be quite confusing. So I just wanted to add to the conversation that it doesn't speak to it going to 0. It just speaks to the fact that the state ad valorem taxes, which is, as you know, is already going to 0, is going to be eliminated, and it could add for a fair amount of confusion amongst the voters.
Yes, sir. I apologize if I misspoke. You're exactly right. The question doesn't ask that, but the question is very direct about the date, the type of tax, and who collects it. And it's short and sweet. Now, we've had a lot of ballot questions that were hard to understand, but I think this one is about as short and sweet as you can get and still convey the meaning of the question.
Further question?
Yes, sir.
Does this speak to, in the ballot question, specifically what tax? It just says state ad valorem taxes. Does that speak to any other besides real property that could be taxed by the state?
Ad valorem, of course, is according to value. We have are in the process of implementing the title ad valorem tax on your automobiles. That used to be applied to automobiles. That is no longer an ad valorem tax, or there's a title fee in lieu of the ad valorem tax. I am not at the moment. Don't think of anything else that the state taxes according to value.
And this would prohibit any other added value-added tax on any item going forward.
This is not a value-added tax.
I'm sorry, but
ad valorem.
Yeah, any other ad valorem taxes that the state may now or in the future ever impose.
If this were approved by the voters, it would prohibit the state from re-implementing this without another constitutional amendment.
Thank you.
Representative Black.
I asked this question when the bill first was read in full committee, and it was probably more appropriate to have been addressed back at the time that we passed the bill phasing out this quarter mill that the state draws. But has anyone addressed the legal issues that the state may be in about requiring the counties to maintain their digest within a close range of 40%? This could put us into some problems with funding education and the use of equalization.
I think that is this other language that's in the bill. I mean, it seems pretty simple. We're going to eliminate the state's portion of ad valorem tax. You'd think it'd all be a strike through, but instead it's all added language, and I think that's what this addresses. Would deal with that. The state would still be responsible for certifying the digest.
I'm all comfortable with it, provided it doesn't lead to a situation where the court says, since we don't have a financial interest in that county digest, that we wouldn't have that right.
This may actually protect that because it puts this language in the Constitution as opposed to the code.
Good enough.
Jeff sees no further questions. What's the pleasure of committee? Move to pass. Send a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you. Bill passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senate Resolution 1027, Senator Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I've come before you with Senate Resolution 1027, which is a joint study committee to explore SPLOST reform. And in the first presentation, you heard a lot about SPLOST and MOST and HOST and so on. So what we really would love to do with this is have 17 members. They'd be allowed to have no more than 5 meetings, and they must file a final report and recommendations by December 1st of 2014. Reason we're doing this, or I'm bringing this forward, is that local governments, I've been hearing they're interested in fractionalized SPLOST. They want to use more money in operations and school SPLOST than capital projects, and I just think that we're going down a slippery slope on some of those, and we need to make sure that we have SPLOST reform very tightened up because, as I said in Representative Hartman's subcommittee, we don't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. SPLOST has been very successful. When you look at Representative Martin and Speaker Pro Tem Jones and Representative Riley, where we're from, we've built some great high schools and schools with our eSPLOST, and one of the reasons that I think every time we do an eSPLOST, it passed with 85 to 88% is because we deliver what we say we're going to deliver, and we've been very successful with it. And so I think we need to make sure we just look at all aspects of any kind of SPLOST reform. So that's why I'm asking for this joint study committee. With that, I'll entertain any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Martin.
Senator, am I incorrect? Fractional SPLOST has passed both the House and the Senate?
Yeah, well, it didn't when I brought this forward, but it had not at the time.
Okay.
But you're correct, yes.
You don't see a reason you'd want to stop that over there?
What's that? No.
Okay.
Not at this time, no.
I just thought you might know something I didn't.
No.
that was going on over there. Just a question on line 17 and 18. The chairperson of House Ways and Means and the chairperson of the Senate, or his or her designee, is it your intent that that be a member of the body or just their designee? It doesn't matter to me. I'm just asking for
clarification. Representative Harbin, we discussed that in his subcommittee, and I think the intent, and maybe we weren't specific enough, is to be a member of the body. And that's the intent of it, not to just have anybody else on there. So that was the intent, Representative.
Okay.
So we would ask that chairman to make sure it is a member of the House or the member of the Senate.
Okay. Another question, if you would. So with the fractional clause, because I think you were here for our discussion on the previous, the ladies' presentation on Senate Bill 92. Mm-hmm. Are you moving forward, and you ask on lines 5 and 6 for additional flexibility relative to cost other than capital cost for SPLOST, that sort of thing? Are you advocating?
No, I'm not advocating that.
Okay, that was a question.
They're seeking it. Well, I'm hearing that, MARTA wants to use more money for operations. Schools want to use money for maintenance and operations. I'm not advocating that at all.
No,
but I think
that's what I was asking. And thanks for doing it, because I think the lady was clear, and the reason for Senate Bill 92 was because they have these, the SPLOST is taking up space in the in the tax digest, so we can do that. And so the last question I'll have, you have members of the House and the Senate. You have the general manager of MARTA, 2 school superintendents. You have a mayor from, and I'm not trying to give you trouble on this, but you have an urban community and a rural community. And I was asking my learned attorney sitting beside me if there's a definition of that, and he said it's kind of what you feel. You may need to tighten that up at some point so that there's not an argument. I mean, I know Atlanta's urban, and someplace in southwest Georgia I was concerned with my seatmate John Burns is a rural area. Right. But maybe do something with that for your lines 28 through 33. I know what you're after.
The intent was
you
to
want
have
a wide geographic thing.
Yeah. So we wanted to have a cross-section of folks on the committee that could bring some new ideas.
Did you mean for the committee members to be paid for their service?
They will be paid no more than 5 meetings.
Okay. Did I miss that in there? Okay, I was looking for. I didn't see. I'd say yeah.
I think it's.
Yeah, Jesse, no more questions. What's your pleasure? Do pass. And a second, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.